By the summer of 1944, Kim Philby was running MI6's Soviet counterintelligence section, the department whose entire purpose was to catch someone exactly like him. That single fact is worth sitting with. Not the betrayal itself. Spies existed on every side of every conflict of the 20th century, and their stories fill archives from London to Moscow. What makes Philby's case different is the specific position he occupied. Section 9 NEX was not a peripheral role. It was not an administrative convenience. It was the institutional mechanism through which British intelligence was supposed to be immune to exactly the kind of penetration Philby had already been conducting for a decade. He did not merely pass secrets from inside MI6. He ran the office designed to stop people like him. Every Soviet asset the British had identified, every network they were running against Moscow, every gap in what London understood and what Moscow knew, all of it crossed Philby's desk. All of it crossed east. What the officers working under him during those years did not know was that the intelligence they were carefully developing was being reviewed by Soviet handlers almost as quickly as it appeared in their reports. The question the record raises is not how he got in. The records show how he got in. The question is why, when the evidence began to appear, and it did appear, nothing decisive was done about it for another 19 years. To understand that, you have to go back to a decision that was made before MI6 ever existed in Philby's life. You have to go back to Cambridge and to a man named Arnold Deutsch. Ask what turns a man into a traitor, and most people reach for money, coercion, or ideology. Philby's case is more uncomfortable than any of those. By his own account, which the operational record confirms, no one forced him. No one blackmailed him. No one paid him in any meaningful sense. He crossed the line because he wanted to. Cambridge in the early 1930s had a particular atmosphere for men of Philby's generation. Fascism was consolidating in Italy and moving fast through Germany. British unemployment had crossed 3 million. The economic and political structures that had organized the previous century appeared, to many young men watching from universities, to be visibly decomposing. At Trinity College, Harold Adrian Russell Philby, already known to everyone as Kim, a childhood nickname borrowed from Kipling, G was one of those men watching. He was the son of St. John Philby, an explorer and Arabist who had spent his career operating at the edges of orthodoxy. Kim had grown up watching his father take unconventional positions and be proved right often enough to make orthodoxy seem like cowardice. At Cambridge, he moved further left than his father ever had. He joined the Cambridge University Socialist Society. He read Marx. Then, by his own subsequent account, he stopped reading and started believing. By 1933 or 1934, the exact date remains uncertain, as he had made a decision that most of his Cambridge contemporaries did not make. He was not, in his own mind, a sympathizer, not an intellectual fellow traveler maintaining a comfortable distance from commitment. He had a side. What he did not yet have was anyone who could make that commitment operational. That changed when Arnold Deutsch found him. Deutsch was an Austrian-born NKVD officer operating in Britain under the cover name Otto. He was educated, culturally fluent, and exceptionally skilled at identifying the specific argument that would move a particular recruit from commitment to action. He had already recruited, or would go on to recruit, several men in Philby's circle, the group later identified as the Cambridge Five. His method was not an ideological delivery. He knew his targets already held the ideology. His method was to identify the moment at which belief had outgrown caution and to offer it a direction. He met Philby. Philby said yes. What that yes required in practice is worth understanding precisely because it shapes everything that follows. Philby was not asked to steal files immediately. He was asked to do something more patient and more dangerous, to erase himself, to walk away from visible communist associations, to construct, in public, the identity of a moderate, reliable man of conventional British instincts. A professional, a safe pair of hands. The commitment to Moscow came first, The entire subsequent career in journalism, the professional reputation, the Spanish Civil War posting, the Franco military decoration that cemented his image as a conservative, and eventual MI6 entry were scaffolding built on top of that original decision. He would be trusted by Britain precisely because he would spend years making himself trustworthy. The architecture was complete before its most consequential phase had even begun. What no one in MI6 yet understood was that the man being built for them had already been built for someone else. He did not wait to be offered the position. He took it. When Section 9 was being constituted in 1944, the role was effectively positioned to go to Felix Cowgill, an experienced MI6 counterintelligence officer with a reasonable institutional claim to the post. The salary was not the point, and the prestige, though considerable, was not the point either. The point was what the position gave him, complete. Institutionally sanctioned visibility into the totality of British knowledge about Soviet intelligence operations. Whatever MI6 had on Soviet networks in Western Europe, on KGB predecessor organizations, on agents who had been identified or were under suspicion, all of it would be held in Section 9. All of it would be Philby's to read, assess, and route. He moved against Cowgill methodically. He worked on the internal politics. He presented himself as the better administrator, the sharper strategic thinker, the man with broader operational vision. He succeeded. Cowgill was displaced. Philby took the desk. This was not a passive benefit that fell to him. His Soviet handlers understood it as an operational achievement, one of the most significant penetrations of Western intelligence in the 20th century. To grasp the scale, it helps to understand what Section 9 actually held. British counterintelligence against the Soviets did not merely contain lists of suspected agents. It contained the logic of British intelligence thinking about Soviet behavior, which methods Moscow used, which cover identities it preferred, which Western institutions it had already penetrated, and most critically, which of its people Britain had already identified. A Soviet intelligence service that can read its adversary's knowledge about it is not being countered. It is being informed. Every time MI6 moved to close in on a Soviet asset, Philby knew. Every time British intelligence began developing a new source inside Soviet networks, Philby knew. The hunt was compromised from its center. This was not limited to information that arrived passively on his desk. From his earlier posting in Section 5 overseeing MI6 networks in Madrid, Gibraltar, Lisbon, and Tangier, Philby had already demonstrated the operational ability to manage assets, control information flow, and selectively withhold intelligence. Those were apprentice years. Section 9E was a different magnitude. Here, whatever the British had on the Soviet Union, Philby had on Soviet intelligence. And whatever Philby had, Moscow had. There is a particular institutional irony embedded in this period that goes beyond the obvious. Philby was not merely passing intelligence about other matters while holding a senior cover role. He was passing intelligence specifically about British counterintelligence efforts against the Soviets, meaning that every operation MI6 was running against Soviet networks was known to those networks before it produced results. British counterintelligence against the USSR in the mid-1940s was, in a meaningful operational sense, not counterintelligence at all. It was a performance. The man it was designed to catch was running it. The question of what to do with that position next had an obvious answer from Moscow's perspective. In 1949, MI6 answered it for them. What does it mean to give the enemy's most trusted officer access to everything your most sensitive ally knows? In 1949, that question stopped being theoretical. MI6 sent Kim Philby to Washington. The posting was the most senior the service had ever offered him. He would serve as chief liaison between MI6, the CIA, and the FBI, the human link through whom the Anglo-American intelligence relationship would function. This was not a routine exchange posting. The years immediately following 1949 were the period during which the architecture of Western Cold War intelligence was being built. The CIA was young. The procedures for what to share, what to withhold, and how far to trust an ally were still being established in real time. Philby was the man through whom both sides would talk. He would know what the Americans knew. He would know what the British were sharing and what they were keeping back. He would know which joint operations were in planning, which sources were under development, and where the combined intelligence apparatus thought the Cold War's most critical vulnerabilities lay. He went to Washington. He established himself. He became, by consistent account, well-liked. One relationship in particular requires attention. James Jesus Angleton was a senior CIA officer, or eventually its chief of counterintelligence. And by temperament, one of the most suspicious men in American intelligence. His professional mandate, like Philby's official mandate at MI6, was to find the enemy inside. In Washington in 1949 and 1950, Philby and Angleton became close. They lunched together regularly. They exchanged assessments. Angleton, the man who would later become notorious for paranoid mole hunts that paralyzed the CIA for years, did not see what was in front of him. The friendship was not incidental. It was covered. And what it covered was access to the full range of what the CIA believed about Soviet intentions, in the years when that belief was being formed. The clock on the Albanian operation started in 1950. The operation was joint Anglo-American, covert, and built on the premise that it was known only to those who needed to know. Its purpose was to insert anti-communist groups into Albania to destabilize the government of Enver Hoxha. The men selected were real. They had been trained, briefed, and equipped. They were being sent in with the expectation that the operation's secrecy was intact. Philby knew about the operation. The men were met not with the conditions they expected, but with a reception that left no ambiguity about what had gone wrong. Some were captured. Some were killed. The Albanian government had been waiting. This was not a failure of planning. It was not a misfortune. The operation failed because the intelligence that should have protected those men had been given to the other side before they crossed the border. Years later, in a partial confession in Beirut, Philby would claim to have worked for Soviet intelligence only between 1934 and 1946. He said nothing about Albania. He said nothing about Washington. The gap between what he admitted and what the operational record now shows spans years of continued activity, hundreds of additional documents, and in the case of Albania, human lives. Those were not the last lives. What happened next should have ended everything. Nicholas Elliott had known Kim Philby for years in the way men of that generation and that institution knew each other through shared postings, shared confidences, and shared assumptions about who each of them fundamentally was. Elliott was not naive. He was an experienced intelligence officer who had operated under difficult conditions. And he believed in Philby with the kind of certainty that only comes from having decided the question a long time ago. He was still believing in May 1951 when the bottom fell out. Guy Burgess and Donald MacLean, two members of what was not yet publicly called the Cambridge Five, defected to Moscow. The disappearance was sudden and public enough to make containment impossible. Within days, the question circulating inside MI6 was unavoidable. How had MacLean known to run, and who had warned him? The answer, which would not be proven for years, pointed at Philby. Burgess had been living at Philby's Washington home before the defection. Philby had known both men. The timeline aligned in ways that could not be easily dismissed. Philby resigned from MI6 in July 1951. Not fired, not arrested, asked to go. What followed across the next 12 years is a case study in how institutions protect themselves from information they cannot afford to accept. Two forces were at work simultaneously. The first was class. The British system of the period struggled structurally to accept that a man of Philby's background, educated at Westminster and Cambridge, well-connected, apparently well-intentioned, could have sustained this kind of betrayal across 3 decades. The social architecture that had produced men like Philby was also the architecture that vouched for them. The second force was institutional self-interest. MI6 had enormous amounts to lose if it formally acknowledged that Philby's entire career had been a fraud. Every operation he had touched, every source that had been exposed, every alliance was brokered based on the intelligence he had seen. Accepting the truth meant accounting for every decision made during that career. In November 1955, 4 years after his resignation, Foreign Secretary Harold Macmillan stood in the House of Commons and publicly cleared Philby of all suspicion. It was a formal parliamentary exoneration, precisely the kind of institutional statement that makes subsequent exposure not merely embarrassing, but structurally devastating. MI6, remarkably, sent Philby to Beirut. He operated there as both journalist and agent, ostensibly still of use. He continued reporting to Moscow. The case reopened only when 2 things happened in close succession. In 1961, a Soviet defector named Anatoly Golitsyn came over to the West with information that, while contested and incomplete, pointed toward Cambridge 5 connections, not yet fully established. Then, in 1962, a woman named Flora Solomon, whom Philby had tried to recruit in 1938, and to whom he had openly disclosed his Soviet commitment, finally told what she knew to Victor Rothschild, a former MI5 officer. Golitsyn's information was not conclusive on its own, but Solomon's account changed the evidentiary picture. Taken together, they created something that had not existed before, a case strong enough to confront Philby directly. The question was what MI6 would do with it. They sent the one man who had spent years defending Philby against precisely this evidence. They sent Nicholas Elliott. The transcript is in the National Archives, file reference KV2 4737. It records what was said in a bugged apartment in Beirut in January 1963, and what was carefully, deliberately, not said. Nicholas Elliott arrived in early January carrying a partial immunity offer, Solomon's account, Golitsyn's material, and the accumulated threads of a case 12 years in the making. What he did not carry was a hat that no one at MI6 appears to have fully prepared for. A contingency for what to do if Philby chose to disappear rather than cooperate. The meetings took place on 9 January and 11 January 1963. The room was wired. And then Elliott, a man who had defended Philby against suspicion for years, staked part of his own professional reputation on his friend's innocence, told Philby what he knew. Philby talked, not completely and not honestly, but enough to constitute a confession. He admitted to working for Soviet intelligence from 1934 to 1946. He framed it as a period of youthful ideological commitment that had ended. He said nothing about Albania. He said nothing about Washington. He said nothing about the 900 or more documents that had crossed from British files to Soviet, hands across the full span of his career, or about Beirut, or about the years after 1946. What he gave Elliott was a partial truth engineered to resemble a complete one, enough to look like cooperation, not enough to be actionable. Elliott left Beirut. What MI6 intended to happen next has never been fully established. Some accounts suggest Elliott expected Philby to follow to London and give a full confession. Some historians have raised the more contested possibility, one that must be treated with appropriate caution, and that has never been confirmed, that MI6, aware that the confession was incomplete, may have allowed what followed deliberately in the hope of running Philby as a penetration source inside Moscow. What can be confirmed is the outcome. On the night of 23 January 1963, Philby left his Beirut apartment. He left his reading glasses on the table. He took his passport. He made his way to the port and boarded a Soviet freighter, the Dolmatova, bound for Odessa. His defection was officially confirmed on 1 July 1963. He lived in Moscow for 25 years, was given the rank of colonel in the KGB and was decorated with Soviet honors. Those who interviewed him there in his later years described a man without visible regret. He died on 11 May 1988. The reading glasses sat on a table in a Beirut apartment, waiting for a man who was already at sea. They are perhaps the most telling detail in the entire record, not the 900 documents, not the parliamentary clearance, not the 30 years of operational failure. The glasses, left behind because he knew he would not be coming back, and because he knew that by the time anyone understood what they signified, the freighter would be beyond reach. A career built entirely on making the British see what he needed them to see, ending with an exit so clean that the most precise men in British intelligence were left staring at a table, trying to understand what they had missed. They had trusted him because he had made himself trustworthy. That was always the whole of it.